Let's talk now about adaptable gardens. And by that I mean gardens that are adaptable no matter what the weather throws at them. Minnesota has always had pretty hard weather, but the climate is shifting a bit, and we are seeing some changes in weather that are worth paying attention to as gardeners. Not to give too much information, but just to summarize, these are the 4 changes that are happening in Minnesota, at least according to the state climatologist. First, the lows are getting higher. That is, our highs may or may not get higher, but our lows are getting higher, particularly in northern Minnesota. So you don't have quite as many really, really deep freeze days as you did in the past. And in the summer, the lows are going to run a little higher than they have in the past. Now, this doesn't make much difference if you're a human, but it does if you're a bug. We're also seeing more what they call mega rain events. Now, a mega rain event is defined as more than 6 inches of rain in an area 1,000 square miles or more, with 8 inches of rain during the course of the event at the center of the event. That's a lot of rain. Since weather has been recorded in Minnesota, 16 of those events have occurred. I don't think we had any this year. 16 of those events have occurred, and half of them have occurred since 2006. So clearly we're either entering a very wet period or there's some other kind of significant change. We're also entering an era with more uneven weather patterns, so that there are parts of Minnesota where I think it was in 2012 was the year the area applied for both drought and flood emergency assistance in the same year. The same county, same year, both drought and flood. And we are seeing the emergence of new insect pests. Now, some, like the Japanese beetle, have been around forever. But there are new ones. The jumping worm is one. The brown marmorated stink bug is one. And I think many people are familiar now with the spotted wing, and I'm Drosophila, SWD they call it, which is an insect that really attacks raspberries and other fruit products. So these are the kind of changes we're seeing. So how do you adapt to those changes? Well, in urban areas, we're going to see a lot of changes in the tree canopy. There will be a big emphasis on planting more diversity of trees and selecting trees that are extremely resilient. This picture was taken on my block in the fall of 2019 or 18, was taken within the last year or so. And there were 33 trees within about a 2-block area on both sides of the street, and they were all taken down at once, and they were all ashes. And they were replaced with a variety of species of trees in order to make the tree canopy more resilient. We may also be seeing the decline in tree species that are very iconic to Minnesota. One of them is the pines up north and the tamarack. And again, most of the change in terms of the, other than insect-related problems with the tree canopy, the climate-related problems all tend to be, or most tend to be happening up in northern Minnesota. So what are adaptable trees, the kinds that they're seeking for the urban tree canopy? Well, one, they tend to be not too large or wide. They're not prone to disease. They need to be able to withstand drought and heavy rainstorms, a lot of wind, and if they're in certain locations, they absolutely have to be able to handle salt. So, one of them, so you're seeing hybridizers come up with more trees that are really sort of adaptable to this environment. This is a picture of my little dog in our backyard, and those are 3 Parkland pillar birches that I planted. This was taken a couple of years ago. And those trees have grown together. They will never get more than 6 or 7 feet wide. They do get pretty tall, and they provide a lot of good screening. They're also, for a birch, a pretty healthy tree. So this is the kind of tree. But other trees that the U of M and others are recommending include things like the catalpa tree, which is an old tree that's used to be used a lot. It's got a very pretty look in the spring, but it is a little bit messy. The tree in the middle is a swamp white oak Quercus bicolor, and about a third of the trees that were planted on my block, the replanted trees after they took out the ash, were Quercus bicolor. So they're putting in a lot of swamp white oak. Very tough tree. The third one is Kentucky coffee tree, which despite its name is actually a native tree to Minnesota. It does get really large, but it's a beautiful, beautiful shade tree. And then you're going to see more recommendations for somewhat smaller, more ornamental trees in urban areas. These are non-natives, but they thrive in tougher environments. The one on the left is a Katsura tree. I think it's a beautiful, beautiful tree. And the one on the right is a Minnesota strain redbud. So it's not really native to Minnesota, but this particular strain does really well, and it's been around for over 40 years. It's a gorgeous spring blooming tree, very tough, and does a great job here in our climate. The other thing you're going to see in terms of adaptability is how we manage our water. And of course, we're all familiar with rain gardens. They've been around for a long time. The new twist on rain gardens is what they call a bioswale. And this is a drawing from Minnesota, or from metroblooms.org, which is teaching, or was teaching, bioswale courses. I think they'll probably continue again. And essentially, a bioswale is like a rain garden, but it's between the sidewalk and the curb in an area where there is sidewalk and curb. And so it's a lower area planted mostly with native and pollinator-friendly plants. The concept is, rather than the water flowing off of grass in that area and into the street and down to the sewer, it will sit in the bioswale, and the plants will soak it up. It'll be a little better management system for water. So that's another aspect of adaptability that you're going to be seeing more of. Okay, let's make a shift from climate change to demographic change. And that's kind of what we have going on as well. Of course, in breaking news, we're all getting older. But there are a lot of demographic changes that have created the need for different styles of gardens and different approaches to gardening. One of the more interesting things that is developing is that millennials are kind of taking over the plant world. Just a quick sort of discussion of demographics and which generations are which. If you're over about 73 or 4, you're what's called the silent generation. If you're between that age and about 55, you're a baby boomer. If you're 55 to 40 or 40 to 55, you're a Generation X. And if you are 25 to 40, you're a millennial. And that's sort of the rising stars of the garden world. And if you're under 25, you're what's called Generation Z. So those are our generations. And currently, the millennial generation is kind of where most of the new gardeners are coming from, and that's terrific. They have a slightly different approach to gardening, and actually they were a growing group of gardeners even before the pandemic hit. And actually in 2018, 29% of gardening households were millennial age. They are, as a group, more likely to be male. Not surprisingly, they are very tech-savvy gardeners. They get their information from the internet. They like a plant ID application very much. They are also concerned about things in the environment and food, and that's a large part of why they are gardening. They also, in terms of plant sales and garden approaches, they're very focused, or there's at least a strong group of millennials very focused on growing houseplants. In fact, in the 3 years between the start of 2017 and the end of 2019, houseplant sales increased by 50%. And most of that was driven by millennials. Which resulted in a huge boom in the houseplant sales business. And if you've bought houseplants, you've noticed that sometimes they can be quite picked over. They've even brought back macrame, to display their houseplants. The one I have the picture of here is called Monstera, or Swiss cheese plant. Maybe some of you have it. It's kind of the it plant to have if you are a young millennial who likes to grow houseplants. The focus on food and pretty food has also led to sort of a rise in interest in herb gardening, both for health, but also because you can make fabulous drinks. I think this is a mojito, and other things using the foods you've grown in your own garden, and then you can share the images on social media. Now, the other growing group in our demographic, in the United States, are people over 90. The number of people age 90 and above has tripled in the last 30 or so years. Now, it's still a fairly small group of people, but as we all know, gardeners are a pretty healthy bunch, and many of them make it to 90. At least we hope we can. Both of these trends, both the number of older gardeners and the number of younger gardeners who may not yet own homes or have larger home lots, has resulted in some changes in how garden supplies and garden plants are sold. One of those changes is the rise in tiny gardens and tiny plants. So you're seeing a lot more technology being put into how to have a container garden that you can fit in a balcony or on a deck. And these, you've got these these very large self-watering containers, which are becoming much more available. The styles are much nicer, and they really do work a lot better because they've got big reservoirs for water at the bottom. The little plant on the right there is called, I think, Tiny Tom tomato. It's a newer variety of tomato that was intended to be grown in a container. And you're seeing increasing number of plants that have the word tiny in front of them, and they're designed for people who may have a very small yard, like outside of a townhome, or they have only a deck, and they're really geared to those two groups of gardeners, sort of the young gardener just starting out and the older gardener who wants a little less property to work with. You're also seeing a rise in vertical gardening, because again, it's something you can do in a smaller space. This particular system was quite elaborate, and I saw it at a garden in Rochester, Minnesota, but there are much smaller systems that could be put again on a deck or a small patio where you could grow those herbs for your mojitos or other ornamental plants or other herbs or vegetables in a fairly small space and still get a pretty good harvest. So you're seeing much more in the vertical gardening area as well. And here's another one also, this is a larger vegetable garden on a regular lot, suburban lot in Hennepin County somewhere. But again, it's raised up, which if you're an older gardener, makes it easier to access the plants. This was a lovely system that I saw on a garden tour some years ago. So age-appropriate tools and technology, which are coming out for older gardeners. Counter height raised beds, seeing a lot more of them. Just much better container technology, that is containers that you can actually put water in the reservoir and you don't necessarily have to water them every day. Ergonomically designed hand tools. And we had a nice feature in Northern Gardener in the last year on some of the adaptations that you can make as you age as a gardener. If you've gardened a long time, you may develop arthritis. I know that from personal experience. So there's new ergonomically designed hand tools. There are a lot more tools with extensions, so you're not having to bend all the time. And then in terms of the technology, there's monitors for everything. You can monitor your soil temperature, you can monitor water, and you can monitor the weather in your yard. And a lot of that is done through wireless technology. So we're seeing much more age-appropriate tools and tech that are being used by both younger and older gardeners.